On behalf of the Glenbrook Valley, South Park, and Crestmont congregations, we extend a warm welcome to all of you in attendance this morning. It's sort of a special arrangement. It's pretty obvious, is it not? We have Brother J.R. Brown with us. He was with us at our dedication yesterday, and we certainly appreciate him staying over and providing us with a fine talk this morning. So we ask that you give your attention now to Brother J.R. Brown. He's a representative from the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society from Brooklyn, Bethel. So we ask that you give him your attention now with the subject, How to Conquer Evil with Good. Brother Brown, please.
The Parsons family were not particularly well liked by the other families that lived in their community. The small town in the state of Minnesota. In fact, if you were to go around the neighborhood and poll the neighbors, most would say they didn't care for the Parsons children either. As a family, Mr. and Mrs. Parson and all their children had the reputation of being self-righteous. They were always going around quoting the scriptures to others and telling them how they ought to live, and people just naturally resented it. But one day an incident of great note occurred at the elementary school where the 8-year-old Parsons girl attended. Her classmates, all third graders, decided that they had had about enough of her and they were going to teach her a lesson. So here's what happened. They watched her as she entered the school on this day of note, and as was the custom, the youngsters would stop by the coat room first and leave any wraps they had, as well as they would leave their bag that they carried their lunch to school in. After she deposited her items in the coat room, she took her seat in class, and several of those third graders slipped into the coat room. They took her lunch bag down from the shelf and opened her sandwich. And they took a handful of pencil shavings and spread them over her sandwich, closed it back up, put it on the shelf. Now, they just knew when she discovered this at noontime that she would get mad. Instead, she taught those third graders a lesson that they remember down to this day, decades later. Here's what happened. The next day, when the 8-year-old arrived at school, she had with her a large basket. And in this basket, she had that evening before baked a large, delicious, hand-decorated cookie, and she proceeded to pass them out and give everybody in the classroom a cookie. And on each cookie she had inscribed, God loves you. End of true story. Now a question to ponder regarding it. Do you think most persons would have responded to an evil in the way this 8-year-old did? By doing something good in return? Here's a better question, at least for us. How do you think you would have responded if someone had deliberately perpetrated an evil toward you, and it was within your hand to make a response? Now, here's why that question becomes so important, because we live in a day and time when the spirit existing or the culture existing now says if someone does an evil to you, you need to pay them back in kind. We live in a time that says, don't get mad, get even. Exact your pound of flesh if someone does an evil toward you. So since we live in a culture where these ideas are accepted, then it becomes very important for us to see, well, where do we stand on this issue? And let me read you something one biblical scholar said. See what you think of his words that sums up the idea. He says, to return evil for good is devilish. To return good for good is human. To return good for evil is divine. Words well chosen. He says, we understand as humans good for good. Reciprocity. It seems to be the accepted thing. But he says, when someone has an evil done to them and they return a good, that's not really the human way of thinking and doing things. He called it divine. Which means simply, that thinking is from God, not something that would originate among us. And that's why the thought of the scholar is actually in harmony with what God says in his word. I'd like you to look at a verse in Romans chapter 12, and it sets the tone for our consideration of this matter. Romans chapter 12, we like to just read one verse now, but it sums up what's divine, what's God's thinking on this matter. Now, the verse is number 21, Romans 12, 21. It says, do not let yourself be conquered by the evil, but keep conquering the evil with the good. Short sentence, but full of meaning. In other words, it's saying, when it comes down to practicality, if someone does an evil to you and you return an evil, you've been defeated. You've been conquered. The evil has conquered you. On the other hand, the implication is if someone does an evil and you return a good, you're the conqueror. You're the victor. You've won. That's why we like the little incident with the 8-year-old Parsons girl. A simple matter, but she was a winner. They deliberately perpetrated an evil against her, and she turned it around, baking them a cookie and reminding them, notwithstanding what they did, that God loves you. That's what the text is talking about. What it comes down to with all of us, are we going to be a winner and conquer the evil? Or, as the verse says, are we going to let ourselves be conquered by the evil? Now, why is this so important for you? Because you're surrounded by evil. It's everywhere. All forms, every kind imaginable, you are facing, you have faced, and you will face. There's more than enough today to go around. There's evil in the way of the many disasters that come and claim the lives of people and property, leaving relatives and friends grieving over what has happened. There are financial reverses that people have due to the difficult economic climate around the world today, including here. Terrorist activities, injustice, discrimination, and even on a more personal basis, there are diseases that cause suffering. Not simply physical diseases, but also mental and emotional diseases, all that cause people to suffer. And that's the point. Evil is anything that causes you to suffer and feel distress. That's evil. It does not make any difference what form it comes in. And that's why we could say we're all going to be tested on it, and regularly. So it becomes important, where do we stand? Are we coming out a victor, a winner? Or as the text we just read said, are you going to let yourself be conquered by this evil? So the question that our topic raises is one of great import. How to conquer the evil with good. Now, before we proceed to give some suggestions and answers on that, what will help us is to understand, how did we get to this place where we are now, where evil is everywhere and we're surrounded by it, and it makes a constant test for all of us? Good question. But let me ask you this to steer us in the right direction. Did you know that there was a time right here on this earth that there was no evil at all? Not even a single act of evil existed. Look in the first book in your Bible, which is Genesis, chapter 1, and following the creation of this wonderful earth where we find ourselves. Look at verse 31 and take note of what its creator says about his creation. Genesis 1:31. After that, God saw everything he had made, and look, it was very good. You can't get any better than that. After creating this jewel of an earth and putting us in this wonderful, enchanting solar system, its creator looked at it and said, it's very good. No evil anywhere was to be found in it. But now, one thing had to be settled at this point. And even though the only humans on earth were our original parents, Adam and Eve, it had to be established from their point of view, and then it would work its way all the way down to us. Who was to decide what was evil and what was good? In other words, would they and everyone else coming along decide for themselves, this is good, this is evil? Or would they accept the fact that the Creator, who made everything good, was the one to decide this is good and this is bad? So to make sure this was understood, God arranged a simple test for Adam and Eve. Now look in chapter 2. Let's get the brief summary of how it went. Here's the command that God gave to Adam. And Jehovah God also laid this command upon the man. From every tree of the garden you may eat to satisfaction. But as for the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, you must not eat from it. For in the day you eat from it, you will positively die. Now there was the test. Simple enough. It singled out one tree, and God's instruction to Adam and for his wife Eve was, just don't eat of that one. Now people will say, why? There didn't have to be a reason. The Creator said not to eat from that one. That meant that was bad. He didn't have to have a reason. It was a test to see if they would recognize his prerogative to say something's good and something's bad. So he had designated this, and there they had God's command. Well, you know how it came out. We're not going to go blow by blow on all the details, but the simple but sad story is the devil came along as a serpent and talked to Eve. And basically his story was, it's just the opposite from what God told you. He says to her, the fact of the matter is, God's holding back the real truth on this. He implied, I don't have anything to do with it, but God knows if you eat from that tree, you'll be able to decide for yourself what's good and bad. You won't need him in the picture at all. Sounded good for her. She could take things in her own hand. She didn't have to exercise obedience to God, so she went and ate from the fruit. Took some of it to her husband Adam and said, here's what I was told by, actually it was a serpent. And he didn't believe the story. He wasn't deceived, but he went along with her and he ate it. But now what had God said? He said, in the day you eat from that fruit, you will positively die. Mercifully, he viewed a day as 1,000 of our years, but the fact of the matter is, within that time, Adam and Eve died. We're thousands of years from that event. They're dead today. And they will remain dead forever. Now, if I were to stop right there and walk off, this would be one of the most depressed audiences you could find. Because you'd say, well, what hope is there in that? Remaining dead forever. All right, now let's give the good news. Let's brighten it up. Did you know that one day, once again, there will be no evil in this earth? How does that happen? Very simply, the Bible tells us here in 2 Peter chapter 3. And this is of interest to us because this is an event timely for this age that we live. Now look at verse 7, and God describes what he's going to do. 2 Peter 3, verse 7. And it says, by the same word, the heavens and the earth that are now are stored up for fire and are being reserved for the day of judgment and of, now notice that, destruction of the ungodly men. That's how it's going to happen. Because God has just allowed this period of time. But then after it, he says, he steps in and he's reserved a day of judgment. He can read the hearts and he's going to remove ungodly men. Now, that's not everybody. Those who look at things God's way and who will respect his prerogative to say what's good and bad, well, they're going to be left here. Look at verse 13. But there are new heavens and a new earth that we are waiting, according to his promise. And in these, righteousness is to dwell. So that's the hope. God will remove the ones he designates as ungodly. He will leave those who want to be a part of that righteous new earth in which there will be no evil. Now here's what it comes down to. Right now, we have to show where we stand in this matter of good and evil. That's why the question was an appropriate one. How to conquer evil? We have to do that now. Not all of it, because the major part we just read, God is going to do. Remove ungodly men. But the part we have to conquer is all of these little things that come up day to day and week by week to indicate to God that from our heart we're on his side, that we view things his way, and we want to be a winner, a conqueror of the evil. So now let's give a little attention to what that means. Conquer, by definition, means to gain mastery over or win by overcoming obstacles or opposition to be victorious. So we ought to set that in mind now, what it means to, as the scripture said, to be a conqueror. It means we are going to overcome obstacles, opposition, difficulty, whether these be mental or moral, whatever the case was, and come out victorious by doing Well, it's good. It's not like some people think. And you hear them speak of this much. They'll say, well, I know there's a lot of evil in the world. The way I'm going to do it is just not personally get involved. I'm not going to do evil toward anyone. I'm just going to hunker down and take it and not lash out against God or anyone else for what's happening. It doesn't work. That's a neutral position. It's not allowed. When it said there we had to conquer, that means a decisive action is required. And evil is only conquered with good. And basically good is a quality. It's a positive quality. So in the face of what is evil, the way we conquer it is by doing what is positive and what amounts to beneficial acts toward others. I want to go back to the Parsons girl again. A minor incident. But the positive approach she took. Bake those kids a cookie. And remind them, in spite of what they did, God loved them. See, that's cutting through accomplishing something. Now, let's see how this can work out in practical terms in our lives. Let's draw attention to a few scenarios, incidents, things that come up in daily life of all of us time to time, and see how it can be conquered, the evil with the good. Now, the first scenario, let's say someone decides they don't like you. In this day and time, you don't really have to do anything for someone to come to that conclusion. They can just decide they don't like you. So that's easy to happen. Let's strengthen it. Let's say they decide they hate you. And maybe they are going to start a vendetta against you. See, that's more than just one evil act. That's a series of evil acts, continual. Sort of like those families, the Hatfields and the McCoys. They always are at each other. I did hear some of them have cooled down because they've got the truth now. Brother mentioned that when I was giving this example. Well, that's good. Some of them have learned. But what they're known for is having this vendetta against the other family. Maybe someone decides that's how they want to view you. Now, they could be anywhere. Maybe they're in your neighborhood and they figure how to get at you. Maybe they work with you at the same place where you work. They could even be in your family, because nowadays in the same family, people will do the worst possible thing to family members, because there's very little natural affection left. And it may happen at school, so I'd like the young persons to listen carefully now. There may be in your school a bully. And the bully decides he doesn't like you. So he threatens you. He's going to beat you up. He curses you, yells at you, talks about your mama. Well, that's life as it really is. As we'd like it to be. So these are things that can happen because of other people deciding that they want to do evil toward us. So now, how do you conquer it? Number one, here is the first thing we all must remember when we become a victim of evil from someone else, and that is, all personal revenge is wrong. Now, if we don't lock into that first, we do not even make a step in the right direction. And this is what so often people forget. All personal revenge is wrong. If there is to be revenge for some evil done, it's up to God, none of us. He has not empowered any of us to get back at someone who does something evil toward us. Now, having that in mind, now remember there has to be good, a positive side. Now look at the words of Jesus here in Matthew chapter 5. And there in Matthew chapter 5, verse 44, I'd like you to take a look at this. Now, here is what Jesus says there. Matthew 5:44, he says, "However, I say to you," now notice what he said, "continue to love your enemies and to pray for those persecuting you, that you may prove yourselves sons of your Father who is in the heavens, since he makes his sun rise upon wicked people and good, and makes it rain upon righteous people and unrighteous." So he said, if they consider you an enemy, he was very clear here. He says, continue to love your enemy. Just because they decided you were their enemy, it does not give you the prerogative to say, I'm your enemy. And then he mentioned a specific good. He said, you could pray for your enemy. Pray to God that they may see things better than what they are seeing. That's a good. It may seem that it's not such a big challenge, but put it together in your mind and heart and go before God and ask him to be forgiving for your enemy. Take the example of Jesus Christ. We can't get a better example to deal with in this. And I'm referring to when he was taken prisoner because the decision had been made to put him to death, to impale him. How was he treated along the way with the crowds that had gathered to see this impalement? Well, the Bible reports that they cheered those taking him along. They cursed him. Some of them that could get close enough, they hit him with their fists or spit on him. And then finally, when they got to the spot where they were to impale him, the soldiers then took iron spikes and drove them through his hands and feet to attach him to the pole. Excruciating pain was felt on his part. And as he was there on the stake being impaled, and all of those who considered him their enemy were there watching, the Bible says this. Listen carefully. I'm just going to read you to remind his words. It says, but Jesus was saying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing. That's Luke 23:34. But let me point out something. In the face of all of this evil being done toward him, he was able to rise above it, and it said he prayed to his Father and said to forgive them. For they know not what they are doing. And the way that is worded in the original language Greek is Jesus used what is an imperfect tense. Now, what that simply means for us is he didn't say it just one time. That's why I said, and Jesus was saying. which meant over and over, as long as he had breath in his body, even with the excruciating pain they were inflicting on him as an evil, he kept praying the same thing: Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing. That's the example. That's what he meant. Now think about this just for a moment. If in the face of the abundance of evil being shown toward him on that occasion, he could not be silenced as to doing good, and the only thing he could do is pray to his Father. And that's why I said there, Jesus was saying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing. Then what should we face in life that's so bad or so difficult or so painful that we should be silent and not do the good in trying to overcome and conquer the evil? It's something to think about. A high standard, but it does show what it is that God has set in the way of what he will consider proof that we're on his side, that we're looking at things his way, and that we're not being just swept along by what's popular in the world that is engulfed in evil. Now let's go to another scenario. It's very similar, but it adds a dimension or so here. And let's talk a little now about what to do when others offend you by words, actions, or gestures. Now that can happen anytime, any place, with people who know the truth and people who do not know it. We're all imperfect. Now, for example, someone comes up to you and, as they put it in contemporary vernacular, in your face, and gives you a piece of their mind. And you don't really know where they're coming from with this. But they're like yelling and screaming it out, almost hysterical and saying things. You don't know what happened. They let you have it, and then they go off. All right, it's happened to you. What do you do? What should you do? Okay, let's say some things that you could do. You could, if possible, just forgive them. They told you off. You didn't really know what they were talking about. You absorbed it. They went away. You could just forgive. Sometimes you can do it. Look in Ephesians chapter 4. And there are here a few things that we should have in mind. Ephesians 4, look at verse 32. That's the one we'd like to read, where it says, "But become kind to one another, tenderly compassionate, freely forgiving one another, just as God also by Christ freely forgave you." Now, that's a possibility. Now, we're not going to say you can always do that, because I didn't hear what she said to you. And maybe you would want to follow this, but in this case, it's not really working. Do you have other options? Yes, you do. But now the second one is time sensitive. In other words, it's only an option if you get to it right away. If you're going to delay in taking this, then it's not going to work for you. Here's what that is. If you thought about it here a little and you say, I just can't let this go like this. I need to go to her, talk it out, find out what's going on. Then you can. Make a nice approach. Now, you do not approach in an accusatory way. It was already, as they say, ticked off, and if you go accusing her, you're not going to get an ear. So you could take it on yourself and say, I know I must have done something very bad to upset you the way you were. And I thought about it. I'd like to really know what it is. It wasn't clear to me what the problem was, but, we've been friends for 25 or 30 years, and I don't want anything to come in the way, so I thought now that I was calm and maybe you had calmed down some, we could talk it out. And then see what happens. Usually, that's enough to sort of diffuse things and get a conversation going to talk it out. Now, why did I say it was time sensitive? Well, looking there in chapter 4, but look at verse 26. And you'll see how the Bible does put some limits here. It says, be wrathful, and yet do not sin. Let the sun not set with you in a provoked state, neither allow place for the devil. So when it brought the sunset in, it introduced a time element. There had to be a certain quickness to resolving it because the sun sets every day. So, in other words, if you don't wait too long, yes, you can go and have that conversation. Now, what happens if you wait too long? Well, it said you allow a place for the devil. You allow a room for the devil. Don't forget what he did in Eden, we talked about earlier, and the consequences of it. So the devil is very powerful, and he wants to move in. He wants space. And if you do not forgive or resolve the matter, then you have created space for him. And so he moves in then, and he's going to try to get you to retaliate against the person who gave you a piece of their mind. Now, I know what some will say, and I'll say it for them. I'm not that type of person. I'm just not the kind that would retaliate or do evil. I didn't like what she did, so I'm just going to give her the cold shoulder. I used to be close to her, so now I'm going to just get out of her life, put her out of mind. I used to sit with her at the hall. I'm going on the other side of the hall now. And every time I can, I'm going to ease on in and out, not even say hello. I used to give her a kiss on the cheek, no more. But I'm not the kind that'll retaliate. Now, if that is a retaliation, I'd like to know what is. That's just her way of doing it, the cold shoulder. But that's what it meant, creating this room or space for the devil. And he moves in. And that is the retaliation he was seeking to bring about. So that's why it becomes very, very important that we either forgive or take steps to talk it out and resolve it. Put the matter at rest, if the person would allow it. We do know that some people don't want to be peaceful. That's why the Bible says, be peaceable with all men as far as it depends on you. Well, that means you want to do your part. Well, suppose I'm innocent. What they say next. 100% innocent. Now, that's pretty high. I don't know if any of us are ever 100% innocent. But let's give her the benefit of the doubt here. All right, here was a man who was innocent. Let me just mention a little bit. They had accused him of stealing. He hadn't stolen anything. They'd accused him of being part of a conspiracy to do a number of wrongs. He hadn't done any of these things. But that was out there. That's what was being talked about. That man was David. Turn to Psalm 69. And the good thing here is we can see how he resolved it, even though he was innocent of what he was accused of, and even though it was out there and people did believe he was guilty. Now, Psalm 69, look at verse 4. Now, David says, those hating me without a cause have become even more than the hairs of my head. Those bringing me to silence, being my enemies, for no reason, have become numerous. What I had not taken by robbery, I then proceeded to give back. Now, question, was there any truth to this? Had he really done those things? Was it out there and everybody was talking about it? Certainly yes. He was not a thief, but did you notice what he said on the end? What I had not stolen, what I had not taken by robbery, to settle this matter, I just paid it back. And that was the law at that time. If someone stole something, you had to pay back 4 times the amount. Put this to rest, this innocent man. And I didn't take anything, but I'm going to pay back 4 times the amount. A man in innocence did it. What's the lesson for us? Well, the lesson for us is sometimes, even when we are innocent, we might be able to go and apologize and put the matter to rest. In other words, we may be able to go to the individual and formulate an apology, and that will end the matter. Now, we don't suggest you can do it all the time, but here we're talking about options. We're talking about ways to conquer the evil with good. And here David saw, in doing this, and although I am being hated and there's no reason, there's no cause, I'm not a thief, I'm not a conspirator, I'll just go and pay back what I didn't steal. So that's a principle that we can think about. Maybe when we are innocent, we could do this. If you do, you're the winner. You're the conqueror. You can't be forced to that position, but it certainly does bring about peace. Now let's leave the scenarios that go along this line and go to one other direction we like to touch on a little. To this point, we've talked about evil done to you by other people. But let's be honest about it. We bring a lot of evil on ourselves. By what we do or what we do not do, but the consequences of our actions at times are really responsible for the evil and not other people. We all like to have someone to blame. So it's more difficult if we look at matters and hear the Bible principles and it's something we're not doing, and that's the reason that this evil is coming our way. For example, let me give you this scenario. A Christian man in the congregation is having problems at home and in the congregation. It all centers around his drinking habits, alcoholic beverages. He and his wife fight a lot, argue at home because she observes him drinking, and a lot of times he tries to sneak in drinks. She finds empty bottles hidden away in the closet and around where he's made himself welcome to that all along. So they get into many arguments. The children are all upset and nervous because they see what's happening there with the parents. And then in the congregation, the elders call him in because 2 or 3 of the sisters have come to them, the elders, and said, you know, the problem here is at some of these social events we have, when this brother starts drinking and comes around, he makes me nervous. I don't like the way he talks, and I'm uncertain as to what gestures might come up, and I've noticed it on several times. So the elders call him in and they use the Bible and they show him what his position would be, and he objects. His argument is, I can hold my liquor. Did anybody see me drunk? No, no one did. He didn't see him drunk, but he makes them nervous. He crosses the line. They feel he is at least high. And that's the wrong direction for soberness, isn't it? So the elders have to take his privileges. There were a few things they allowed him to do around the hall. They took him away and they sat him down. Now, there's the story. What do you think? Who's creating the problem? Who can control this? Who can stop it right away by applying Bible principles? Is the problem his wife, his children, the elders? Is it true that everybody's picking on him, like he says? No, he can change it immediately. He has a couple options. He can move to the position of abstinence. So if he didn't take a drink at all, could anybody say anything? Or he can move to the Christian position, if you want, a drink of moderateness. Not taking more than what is reasonable and acceptable among other people. Not personally what he thinks he is doing or not doing. So there's a case where here someone thinks there is some great conspiracy against them and everybody's picking on them and doesn't understand their personal rights, when really in this case he's causing his own problems. He's stretching the limits. He's going too far. Yes, there's a lot of evil in his life because he's not getting along at home. In the congregation now, he's upset and bitter and sullen about what's being done. But he's bringing it all on himself because he's not applying Bible principles. Well, that's just to illustrate sometimes we can be having problems at home or with the friends or whatever, and we can start to think everybody else is to blame, but we need to look at things and say, are there principles I'm not applying that accounts for some of this evil? If so, then you pray to Jehovah and ask him to help you make the adjustments and changes so as to bring about a better climate in the congregation or elsewhere if it exists. That's simply to illustrate, do not leave out self when you're thinking about an abundance of evil that somehow has crept in your life. So now in conclusion then, if you take this way of being a conqueror of evil, are you taking a soft course if you refuse to be hard and callous, or as they say, and stand up for your rights, don't let others push you around, speak up for yourself? That's all out there in the world. No. You're better off taking the course that the Bible spells out for all of us. For one reason, if you are a conqueror, you are going to be the one with contentment and more satisfaction. In other words, you're going to feel good inside because you know you did the right thing. Let's bring up again that 8-year-old Parsons girl. Yes, a child, but who do you think really felt good that day when they left class? Sure, the little other third graders enjoyed the cookie and eating it, fudge all over their mouth, chocolate. They couldn't resist eating it, but they know they tried to do her in. But she left feeling good inside. Tall spiritually. They left. They had a cookie. what it amounted to. So in a small way, it illustrates there is great satisfaction when you stand up to an effort to bring you down and defeat you in this matter of evil. Then God gets the credit. Remember the scholar said, good for good is human, but to return good when someone does an evil is divine. People wonder about it. Where do you get that strength and that stamina to face up to something like that and not try to retaliate or get even? And who knows? Maybe the very ones trying to do evil to you will in time see that your position is better than theirs, and maybe they'll look into matters of the Bible and get a knowledge of the truth. There are many good reasons to feel good about this stand. Therefore, do not let yourself be conquered by the evil, but keep conquering the evil with the good.
Brother Brown, I'm sure I speak on behalf of all 334 in attendance in thanking you for that very encouraging discussion.